Hello, my name is Diana Sharo. Welcome to Dialogue. Today we have a special edition and our main topic is education. As now Dialogue is an info partner of Leonard Education. Leonard Education is an organization that provides scholarships for under-resourced Palestinian youth from refugee camps. And today our guest is first board member of Leonard, former vice president of Carleton College, Fred Rogers. Hello Fred, thank you so much for finding time for this dialogue. It's a great pleasure to have you here. Meet you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to meet you and to join you. Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to start a little bit talking about your career path. I know that you spent over 45 years in higher education and you're former vice president of Carleton College. And what led you to this education path?
Yeah, well, it's funny. Both my parents were educators. My father was a college professor and my mother taught elementary school. And so I kind of just spent my childhood passing around classrooms, helping them set up things and clean classrooms. And we had students in our house a lot when I was growing up. And so I don't know, it just felt like a very natural place. When I went to graduate school, I actually wanted to be a city manager. So I thought I wanted to go and help run cities. I was in a school of public policy. But the first job I got offered was to work at the university where I was graduating from. And so I did that. I thought I would be there for a year or two. And I stayed there 16 years. And now here I am, having done this at 3 universities over the course of 45 years. So it's just what happens.
And what did you study yourself? What was the main?
As an undergraduate, I studied mathematics. And then as a graduate student, I went to a school for public policy. It was kind of like a public MBA. Yeah.
I have so much respect to people that study mathematics. What I see that when I see your biography, your life is a long time connected actually to the Arab world. How did it start?
Yeah. That's another interesting story that started with my family, my origin family. So my mother was born in China because her parents were medical missionaries there in China at the Rockefeller Hospital in the 1920s. And so she had this idea that somehow she wanted to do something like that once in her life. And so she persuaded my father to apply for this job in Saudi Arabia, teaching at a new college that was just being started there. And so he did, and he got the job. And so they decided to go there and spend 2 years at this college where they would help start this new university in Dhahran. And I went to high school then in Beirut because there wasn't an American high school in Saudi Arabia. American schools in Saudi Arabia only went up to the 8th grade. So I went to high school in Beirut. I finished high school in Beirut. They decided to continue on, so they came back to the States after 2 years, sold our house, and went back, and they stayed there 12 years. And I went on to college, so I didn't get to go back there. My younger brothers went back and had all kinds of interesting adventures. They took road trips to Baghdad, they took trips to Tehran, and trips down in the Ruba Khali in Saudi Arabia, and all kinds of fun places. But I was off in college and graduate school, so I didn't get to go on most of those. But, we had this great connection. And then later on, other things happened. I can talk about that.
But like later on, you became very much involved with the lives of Palestinian students from refugee camps, in Lebanon and Tripoli. So how did you get to meet those students?
Well, I met those students because they applied to Carleton and they were accepted. And we were trying to get a Palestinian student into Carleton, I was. And most of the students we could identify weren't qualified. They didn't have enough English. It was hard to really get a good, solid background. Carleton's a very tough place to be as a student. And so some students thought, well, just, get me in and I'll be fine. But the admissions people and the faculty really don't like to do that, because if you can't keep up with the work, it's not fun. And then you're going to have issues. And so it's really better to be at a place where, as I say, everyone can succeed. And so we worked hard to find a student. We found this student who was just amazing. She was the top completer in the baccalaureate exam. She was just brilliant. Her English was really good. She had basically spent all her years in this camp studying. So she would come home from school and just study. And she was really good. So she was admitted. And when she was admitted, then I decided I would go there and meet her. I was serving at the time as a trustee of another university in Lebanon, Lebanese American University. And so I started doing that back in the 80s and continued doing that for quite a long time. And that was another interesting experience in the Middle East. But as a result of that, I traveled to Beirut fairly often, at least once a year. Mm-hmm. And so I would take one of those trips and go visit her. So we did that. My wife went with me on that trip, and we got in a service and we went up to Tripoli, and her family met us, and we went out to their house and had a meal where her mother was, distressed that we didn't eat enough, which is typical of any Arab family that you go to. No matter how much you eat, you didn't eat enough. And it was very nice.
Was it was it the only time you visited the place where one of those students lived, or you had more experiences like this visiting?
No, I went back to that camp a couple of years later, trying to recruit more students. And I'd actually made a video that I had 3 international students at Carleton talk about their experience, one of them being this girl from Tripoli. And so I went back and showed that at her high school, and it was like she was the, Madonna from her local high school. She was this girl who had gone off and succeeded in America with this big scholarship, and there she was on the screen in front of all these younger underclassmen who had known her when she was a senior, I guess, or otherwise. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of fun. And then I went to some other camps in Beirut. Another student I got very close to ended up being admitted to Carleton, but he didn't come here. He went to the University of Rochester, and he's done very well. He's got a PhD there now, and he's just doing great. So it was fun to meet a number of students in different places.
Mm-hmm. When you visited them in these camps, what was like? What was it like? Was it something that you expected to see, or what was your impression from?
These are both UNRWA schools that I was visiting. So the United Nations Relief Works Agency, and UNRWA runs these schools for Palestinians, as you know, in these camps. The teachers were largely Palestinians. And so one thing I was impressed with was the teachers were really dedicated to trying to help these kids get out, basically figure out how to get an education. They're crowded. I remember being in classrooms where the students were sitting 2 to a chair. So it's crowded sometimes. The rooms were big. There were a lot of signs and posters around the room. I couldn't read all of them in Arabic, but I could read some of them, and they were basically exhorting people to think about life and to think about, the future. Students were hoping to get a scholarship. That's their imagination is, I'll get a scholarship. Somebody will help me go to college. And as I said, many of them probably weren't qualified, either their English or their other studies. And so I exhorted them to study hard where they were. Do your studies now really well, work at that. And many of them go on to college. They do get to school. LEU developed a program for taking kids, and they've got students. So there are schools in Beirut, American University Beirut or Lebanese American University or other schools there that students can also go to. But basically just trying to encourage them to go to higher education. And, it's a particularly challenge for the women because some of their families aren't as supportive of them going to college as others. But I was surprised also to find women who were feeling supported. The students who were really good students, this one who came here, for example, her family was very supportive of her. She had 2 sisters, and they all went to college. And another one, is living in Texas, and one graduated from college in Lebanon. So there are families that really understand that as well. It's not just the stereotype.
And what do you think, what are the main challenges those students actually face when they come to another country, and it's probably another system, so.
It's hugely challenging for students. It's challenging for students in any circumstance where they come from a circumstance that's not very well off, it's not really middle class, it's not fully integrated into Western, upper class society, to come to one of these elite campuses where, things are so abundant and everybody expects you to have things and do things. And so it's a challenge. We have students from the States who come from impoverished backgrounds who have very similar challenges. But our international students also suffer for some language issues they have to get over and other cultural issues. I remember one of the most striking things an international student shared with me was the new student orientation goes on the first week of school, and students get in groups of 15 or 20, and they're supposed to meet all their new classmates. And so, it's a very intended to be a very bonding and welcoming environment. And one of the things they do is they sit in circles on the lawn around campus and talk and share experiences. This international student told me she was very uncomfortable because in the camp, no one sat on the ground except beggars. And so sitting on the ground itself was a really foreign idea for her, to sit on the ground. And you just wouldn't imagine that, right? As a normal thing, but it made her uncomfortable. So she was uncomfortable about that, which nobody else could really understand or perceive in the midst of also trying to do these other things. So there are just a lot of little cultural markers like that, I think, that are hard for people to get over, and it's hard for people here to anticipate.
Yeah, that's right. And I know that you work with different NGOs. Can you tell a bit more about them?
Yeah, well, as I said, I spent a long time as a trustee of this university in Lebanon, and that was really very interesting, working through the aftermath of the Civil War in the 80s in Lebanon. And then more recently, I've been working on the board of the ANIRA, which is an organization founded in the late 60s after the 67 war to try to do aid for and reconstruction in Palestine. And when I was in Palestine recently, traveling there, it was amazing to me the number of villages. Every village and city basically in the West Bank has some plaque that describes the plaza, the well, the stairway, the building as an ANIRA USAID project. They've just done a tremendous number of infrastructure projects with water. The market in Bethlehem, the fruit market, was rebuilt by ANIRA and USAID. And more recently, they've really focused on education and healthcare and really working especially around women's healthcare. So it's just a lot of really interesting, important work in that area. Their education is early education, not so much higher education, but they've been a big leader. So anyway, that's been a great organization to work with. I'd love to go back and try to recruit more students, but nobody can travel there right now, so it's hard.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yes, and you were, as far as I understand, you were the first board member in Leonard Education. How did you come in touch with this organization?
Yeah, well, Dee and I got to know each other from my earlier recruitment efforts before she formed LEO. And her thing was really trying to help these students be successful in the United States. The issues we were talking about a few minutes ago, not just cultural acclimation, but finding ways to get money for the small things it takes to get books or to get a computer. Or some people come and they really haven't had consistent health care. And so we have students with dental problems and other issues that they just haven't addressed. And so all of a sudden, just finding all the things they need to be successful in school, whether it's getting medical attention or it's finding the things for their room or just figuring out how to navigate the expectations of the campus where they are. So she was really helping a number of students do that. What to do over break. When everybody goes home for break, what do you do when you can't go home?
Yeah.
And that resonates with me because when I came to Carleton as a student from Saudi Arabia, I didn't go home for break. My family couldn't afford to send me back there every time there was a week or 2 week break in school. And so I ended up camping out in relatives' houses or basements or whatever. And that's what these students end up doing. So anyway, just helping with those kind of things. I met her doing that. And then she formed LEO and she said, I'm going to do this work. Would you be interested in working with me? And I said, sure. And she said, well, that's going to mean you'll be a board member. And I said, I didn't know that, but I would be happy to help. So So we started off, and then she's recruited quite a few other very talented supporting people as well.
Yeah, I think this philosophy is great because, as you say, there can be challenges in the education, but there are so many more challenges apart from that. So I think that's great when you can help them in the complex altogether. So, and yeah, and what do you think? Like, some parents are scared to send their kids somewhere far away. What do you think can be advantages of doing that? Like, you know, just sending your kids somewhere in another country.
Well, it can be, it can be very liberating and very transformative. College is often transformative for students who go there. But the student has to be able to feel empowered to follow their own, desires and inclinations, so to speak, and motivated, but not petrified. I've seen in my long career of higher education, I've seen students who just thrived at being at campuses, and I've seen students who really just felt crushed. They couldn't live up to their parents' expectations. They didn't feel they were doing something that they wanted to do. They were trying to prove something for somebody else. And that just doesn't work. So sending people away to campus, whether it's to the United States or, across town, really requires some measure of trust and support for those students to let them do what they're going to do as individuals, not because they're doing something else. And the challenge for that is that so many parents, especially again from really struggling backgrounds economically, feel like their chance at success is to have their child be educated and get a good job, and then those children support the whole family. And that often happens, and the students feel that pressure. And they feel like, I have to do this. So I have to become something career-wise that's going to get me that income that'll support everybody. And their imagination is that's medicine or engineering. Those seem to be the two things that everybody wants to do. And, so being a social worker or being a writer or something else, a teacher doesn't usually figure in those calculations, or an artist. And students have to really struggle to figure out what they want to do and how that fits with what's expected of them. And I think that's hard for a lot of low-income students, not just international students, but yeah.
And with those students that, for example, like from Leonard, this Palestinian students that arrived to the United States, what was the main changes you could see actually before and after? Was there some kind of a line that actually you could see that something is changing in there? Because as far as I understand, that the system is really different. The educational system is different.
Yeah, well, the American education system is different. In the European model, which is more what goes on in the Middle East, you decide somewhere in sort of junior high school, early high school, what your career path is going to be. And then you sort of follow that. And so these students are expected by the time they finish their high school education to know what they want to do. Yeah. And in the American world, that's not the case. You may know, but you go to college, and at least at a liberal arts college, you go there to explore things and to figure out. You might be doing something very different. And students can change their mind. And so I think watching people sort of loosen up about that and feel like empowered to try something else and to enjoy it and say, wow, I never ever would have done that, but that was actually really cool. That was exciting to me. So that's a good thing. The other surprising thing to me that I hadn't really understood, most Palestinian students of the current generation who live in these camps, their parents don't want to talk to them about their own history. And so their idea is, and it's true of I think other people, a lot of the Latino students in this country. I know I've met Latino students who didn't know they were illegal until they went to go to college. Their parents never told them how they came to the States. So Palestinians have that same thing. And so you find students who are here in the States and they start becoming more attuned to sort of the political dialogue. And for them, it's kind of an awakening. Like, I knew there were issues, but I didn't really understand it all, even about their own history. And so I think that's also powerful to watch students begin to sort of claim and understand their own history and culture in that way. Um, and then they meet other people, they meet friends, and they make friends with, other international students or other Americans, and just really cross. That's what college is all about, really meeting people who you wouldn't have otherwise, and discovering very different points of view. And that
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and I know it was challenging time, of course, now with the COVID for all of us. But like, could you feel this difference between having this virtual education, and do you think that this is actually a future, or do you think still that this is so much better to have, let's say, a live lections or face-to-face communication instead
Yeah.
of e-communication?
That's really interesting, because when this all started a year ago, we were in the midst of, a decade-long discussion about should, education be virtual, should more education be virtual, and how is that going to change the future of higher education? And some things that faculty and others on campuses thought would be very difficult or take a long time to do, they ended up doing in the space of like 3 weeks. So it was really kind of amazing to watch that happen. And yet I think, having done it and done it really creatively, I think people really worked hard at being creative about that. There's all kinds of interesting stories across the country of how faculty really went out of their way to try to make students still feel engaged. I think, if anything, it reinforced the importance of being together physically. That physically being together is just different. No matter how hard you do that, it's not the same. And I think it created, in a sense, a greater desire for people to be together and to be in community and to have casual conversation. It's just, when you're in a Zoom meeting, it's over and you're done. You can't say, let's go sit out on the bench outside and talk for another 10 minutes.
Yeah.
You're just done. And so it just doesn't have the same sense. So I think, if anything, there are some things you can learn that way that might be efficient. You don't need to spend all your time in class doing that. But I don't think it in any way diminished the importance and the appreciation for in-person community and relationship.
Mm. And I'm curious to ask you that because I know that you are like so many years in higher education, and of course the time is changing. What do you think are the changes that my education face in the nearest future? And what are, from your point of view, those professions that are the most, let's say, in trend now that going to be, useful?
Yeah. Well, I think, the big challenge for higher education is to become more available for everybody. Higher education, 50 years ago was basically for the people who could afford it. And it's tried to do a lot about that in the last 50 years, and it's gotten a lot better. I mean, when I went to college, right after the war, the Defense Education Act was giving out scholarships and loans to students. And that's really what enabled me to be able to go to college, is I got that financial aid. And now that's even broader, and there's a lot more support for that. But that needs to continue to expand so that the people who really want to go to college, who are able to study and take advantage of being in college, have the opportunity to do that. I think we're doing better, but I think we need to do even better. And I think, not only just in terms of access financially, but also access physically. Trying to figure out how to make it available to people more broadly around the world, more broadly around the country. There are parts of the country, as you know, where there's not really yet wide education. I mean, Palestine is one interesting area where there are a lot of colleges in the West Bank and in Gaza. And students go to college there and get degrees. And, the problem is they don't have career opportunities because there aren't a lot of jobs there. And one of the growing fields of employment, actually, for people in places like that is the internet and digital work, because you can do that remotely. So oddly, even if you can get an education locally, you can work remotely.
Yeah.
And so I know there are people working for Google and other companies like that in areas where they can't actually physically leave, but they can work and they've got an education and they're brilliant. And so, as we've known for a long time, the human mind is not constrained by circumstances of birth. Brilliant people show up everywhere. And, giving everybody an opportunity helps people develop those talents that are quite broadly distributed. So I think for degrees, for careers, I don't really have any good advice. I think, the world is moving to more of a service and professional economy. And so I think more people are going to be working in those fields and less in the vocational fields. But at the same time, because of that, and because people keep saying that, there's a shortage of people in a lot of the vocations. And so there's also opportunities there. I know there's all kinds of places for people who are really good with their hands. And those are not lesser jobs. Those are people who are particularly skilled and insightful and ingenious about solving problems in their own world. And so I think to appreciate both of those and to just keep encouraging people to pursue what is both interesting and available.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for a very interesting talk. And I wish you also, of course, good luck to continue this great journey, helping the others. Thank you very much.
Well, good to meet you. Thank you very much. Mm-hmm.